Welcome to Tuesday. It's Meet the Press Daily. Good evening. I'm Chuck Todd here in Washington. Authorities right now are scrambling to address a rise in violent white extremism as the president has been openly stoking racial resentment in this country. We've just had another mass shooting where another gunman's anti-immigrant screed eerily echoes the president's anti-immigrant rhetoric. But this is just one aspect of the Trump presidency that appears to be crumbling. If this were any other presidency, Democrat, Republican, Independent, we'd look at the totality of what's going on and conclude the same thing. This is failing right now, and it's failing badly. Let's let this sink in for a moment. This isn't just about stoking racial resentment. It isn't just about an increase in mass shootings. It's about a lot more than that. The president is now escalating a dangerous trade war with China with no apparent exit strategy, despite promising these are easy to win. Elected Republicans are fleeing Congress amid this toxic stew of presidential politics. And let's face it, it's a Republican Party that's a shell of what it once was, and many of these folks don't want to be members of it anymore, or at least in this iteration. Meanwhile, half of the House Democratic caucus is calling for impeachment proceedings. American alliances abroad are in a serious state of decay. North Korea is testing more missiles. Iran doesn't want to negotiate. Russia is still coming after us. The president still won't acknowledge what his own government, plus Robert Mueller, confirmed was a sweeping attack on our democracy. By the way, the ambassador to Russia just resigned today. Situation at the southern border is worse than it was when the president took office. The government is a mess. We won't even mention our giant scroll of vacancies across the cabinet. Never mind the actings, by the way. Oh, and yes, July was the hottest month on record. How can you look at this presidency right now and say it's working? Let's turn to some experts we have for tonight. CNBC editor-at-large John Harwood, MSNBC contributor and Voto Latino president and CEO Maria Teresa Kumar, and Michael Steele, former senior advisor to John Boehner and Jeb Bush. And Michael Steele, I'm going to start with you because, believe it or not, it's one of your bosses that inspired this. It is Jeb Bush. Jeb Bush went off on this Twitter screed that I thought was very appropriate because it's sort of like, as we're appropriately focused on this crisis at hand, oh, by the way, the world's on fire, and we have a president that has no interest in playing firefighter on that. I do want to play, well, I want to wait on some of that sound. So apparently Jeb Bush sees the same thing.
I think this. By the way, is this hemlock? That I could use that. No, look, this is a world on fire. Yeah. Donald Trump promised chaos, and he has delivered. And that's what we're looking at on every issue, foreign and domestic. It's a world spinning out of control. And I think that is a serious challenge for the president, and it's a serious challenge for our political system that is going to have to operate around this person as commander-in-chief.
I don't know if our political system can handle how much more it can handle, Maria.
Look, I'm in the work of voter registration, of encouraging participation. And when people say our government is broken, I encourage people to see what happened last November. We had the very first time the most diverse set of Americans going to the voting booth. We had the most diverse individuals in 100 years casting a ballot. And on January, that beauty of what our possibility is was sworn in. And that Congress, despite looking at the investigations of what the Trump campaign, what Trump has done and the Mueller investigation, they have passed legislation when it comes to modernizing our election system, when it's talking about equal pay, when it's talking about making sure that we do pass
background checks. So you're making the case that if you participate, you can make change.
Right. Well, and we have a litany of stuff. And who is blocking? It's the Republican Party. Not only are they standing silently by and saying, OK, we are not condoning this, condemning this president, but at the same time, they are not doing the work of the people who sent them into office.
John Howard, one of the other reasons why I wanted to lead this way, and we're going to get into specific parts of the white supremacy issue, of the gun issue, but I wanted to lead with this way because it's exactly what Rick Perry, Ted Cruz, and Jeb Bush predicted would happen had he become president of the United States.
Hillary Clinton did the same thing.
She said it too, but I'm saying this was, I want to remind people, because I know everything wants to be put into these partisan screeds. And it's like, this is, now two of them have, you could argue, have capitulated. Jeb has not.
Jeb Bush said,
he said
you are a chaos candidate and you're going to be a chaos president.
Here we are.
Ted Cruz said, you're a pathological liar. Marco Rubio said you're a con man. Hillary Clinton said he's not prepared to be president. All those people were proven correct. And
but by the way, what good does it say it told you so now? We're in the middle of this.
Well, we are, but I think Maria has made the most significant point, which is there are a lot of people look at this situation and say, all these things are going wrong. The president's been discredited in so many ways, but there are no consequences. Nothing happened. No, there are consequences. Democrats won the House in 2018, and I think they're the odds suggest they're on track to win the presidency in 2020. His presidency's got another year and a half to run. But I'm a little bit more optimistic that the country is going to survive this. We're going to have a campaign next year. He'll have an opponent, and people will be able to make their judgment as they did in 2020.
Well, I wonder, and that is a question I've gotten a lot today from various people. Is this a tipping point? And I always say, well, tipping point for what? Okay, and the reason I say this for what, I don't know. I think tomorrow's going to be a fascinating day when he visits these cities.
So I just spent 4 weeks in El Paso. I have family in El Paso. El Paso is as disconnected from the political spectrum as you could possibly imagine. What happened over the weekend has politicized the community in ways that I don't think people can actually comprehend. You have 2.5 million unregistered Latino youth in Texas. The sadness and the tragedy, I can tell you from the Latino community, there's also resilience.
I guess the question I have is will the president be taken seriously at all by his remarks this week? Because I want to play an example. Charlottesville. Teleprompter temperament of Donald Trump says the words that you would assume you'd want to hear from a president. Take a listen.
Racism is evil, and those who cause violence in its name are criminals and thugs, including the KKK, neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and other hate groups that are repugnant to everything we hold dear as Americans. You had some very bad people in that group, but you also had people that were very fine people on both sides.
So that was one example. When he got off the teleprompter, we found out what he really thought. I want to play the Pittsburgh shooter as well, because on this one, the Pittsburgh synagogue shooting, what people forget is how connected this actually was to his immigration rhetoric. The shooter targeted that synagogue not only because it had Jews in it, but this synagogue was helping with the refugee crisis at the border. This is important. You're going to hear teleprompter Trump, and then you're going to see him unscripted. Here it is.
The vile, hate-filled poison of anti-Semitism must be condemned and confronted everywhere and anywhere it appears. There must be no tolerance for anti-Semitism in America or for any form of religious or racial hatred or prejudice. I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. No, I wouldn't. I don't know who, but I wouldn't be surprised. A lot of people say yes.
I know that wasn't on there. It was about, he was asked right after that, is George Soros funding the caravan?
Right.
Michael Steele, why do we think anything he said yesterday will be at all what he is when he's unscripted?
Well, there's no reason to. And I think that this is we all saw the New York Times overnight changing a headline, their story on the president's remarks yesterday, because they wrote up teleprompter Trump, rather than the balanced view shown by the tweets, the offhand comments, and the teleprompter. I agree with teleprompter Trump almost entirely.
By the way, most Americans, I think,
teleprompter
Trump is the president that doesn't exist.
He sounds like a Republican president. He sounds like a president.
Trump tells us is that he's able to read. Okay.
Thank you, John.
That is not
always. Toledo. I don't think Toledo is in the.
Well, he ad-libbed.
He's not especially good at that. But look, Donald Trump's 73 years old. He's been on Twitter for 10 years. His character was formed long before Twitter existed, long before he was president. He has shown us who he is. His words are weightless. They don't. When he is reading what other people write for him, it doesn't connect with his gut.
By the way, it's so true.
There's no
I agree. I don't
behind
think any speech he gives now at the White House has any impact on anybody other than people that already support him.
No, and I think that the tweets are a window into his soul. I mean,
Absolutely.
He came to the medium later, but he is showing the opinions and ideas that animate him in these tweets. And I think that's why that's the real story in a lot of ways, rather than what he says at the podium.
There's two things that I've wondered about as sort of fallout in different ways with each party. One has to do with the Democrats. Maria, it was something Emanuel Cleaver said after when he came out for impeachment, and he said, the Elijah Cummings thing might have had some impact on me. It wasn't just, he was sort of saying, like, I can't say there was a 0%.
Right.
This moment may have an impact. This is one of those where you think that, well, if it's about Mueller, it's one thing, but my God, this isn't a way to keep Democrats from signing up for impeachment, put it that way.
The president right now is using his office to incite insecurity in 100 million people's households. And what I mean by that is when we talk about this idea of people of color, we always imagine it as being a sliver of our communities.
Did he even say the word Hispanic yesterday?
No, he did not.
Did he do anything yesterday to reassure Hispanic Americans that they shouldn't be targeted?
No. And this was fascinating. When you read the creed of this individual who got into his car, drove 10 hours to the safest city in our country, and targeting a city that is 85% Latino, and in it not only lifted the tweets of the president to say, and using the same words of invasion and infestation, but then also connected it again to the Hispanic vote. It's very clear that what he sees as a threat, and we have to make sure that we stand as allies and saying that this is not the America we are. Because when we talk about this hemorrhaging of Republicans from the House and not seeking re-election, there's a hemorrhaging of Republicans from the party. When we say that 30% or 50% or 90% of Republicans are with the president, that's increasingly a small fraction of the country.
So I think one fallout from this is increased Democrats in signing up for impeachment, and I think the other one is Republicans won't speak out. They'll speak with their feet. You talked about that. I mean, I'll be shocked if Susan Collins runs for re-election now. In this political environment. I'd just be shocked.
4 of the 12 Republicans who've announced they're not running for president next year, not running for re-election next year, are Texans.
Yep.
Yeah. And by the way, half of them in safe. You're seeing people in safe seats. Look, Mike Conaway to me is the most interesting one that retired, because he just basically said he had a seat for life.
Right.
It's like, I don't want to be here.
Right.
I don't want to run under this banner.
Yeah, I mean, look, serving the minority in the House of Representatives sucks. Serving under Trump is particularly unpleasant. You've got to answer for a lot of tweets and a lot of stuff that you didn't do, isn't your responsibility, but that's all you get asked about, and that's not fun.
And it's also unpatriotic. I think that that's where the American people are having such a hard time. What we have right now in the White House is not part of the political spectrum. He is not a Republican in many ways, and that is, I think, why this conversation that we have sometimes is so difficult, because we make him sound like he's part of a political party. He's part of Trump.
There's also, I think, the president has one election left. If you are a Republican who wants to win elections in 22, 24, 26 in the future, it might be a good couple of years to not be here.
The Will Hurd decision struck me as that in a hurry.
It's
if you want to be
example.
a part of, I mean, I've joked this with my staff, John, I actually think by 2028, maybe not by 2024, that there'll be a Republican presidential debate that will be an argument over who's got fewer ties to Trump.
Well, that's logical. Look, he's taking the Republican Party down a cul-de-sac where no good things will happen. We all remember Pete Wilson in 1994. He was running for re-election in California. California had been a Republican state as recently as 1988. It was carried by George H.W. Bush against Michael Dukakis. Then he ran a very tough anti-immigrant campaign. He won. He won that one election.
Worked for an election.
And Republicans have not won big statewide offices ever since.
His re-election was the death sentence for the Republican Party.
That's exactly right. I mean, just anecdotally, my family, I came home from college during that, and my family, and my grandmother, my aunts and uncles, all of us, and talk about chain migration, they decided at that Thanksgiving dinner that they were going to become U.S. citizens. That conversation was reverberating across California for millions of households.
Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Beat the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.